you are around the world. Thanks for joining on another Carnegie event. This is particularly interesting and very timely. That's for sure. We're going to talk about Turkish elections and what does that mean locally, regionally, and internationally. Definitely, everyone inside Turkey, and most surely a lot of people, a lot of leaders in the region, but in faraway capitals were holding their breath to see how will the Turkish elections unfold and what will be the results. Given that the results of yesterday's elections, I think that feeling will be prolonged for at least another few weeks. Uh, so today I'm joined with uh, yeah, yeah. So today I'm joined with three colleagues. Alper Koşkun, he's a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe, and he leads Turkey and the World project at Carnegie Middle East. Carnegie, okay, I brought you to Middle East, Alper. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's been focused on Turkey, but Turkey EU and Turkey US relations in particular. Uh, we have also Barcin Yinanç, right? Sorry for the mispronunciation. Journalist with 30 years of experience. Her research has been focused on many issues, including Turkish foreign policy, Turkish affairs, regional developments in the Middle East and the Caucasus, and she's worked in several places, including CNN Turk and Hürriyet Daily. Then we have Celine Nasi, journalist, contributor to Karar newspaper, and a regular contributor to Femi Fikr, all-female TV debate program hosted by Mediascope. So she also focuses in her research on various aspects, but I think particularly on Turkey-Israel relations. Okay, so I don't want to take more of this time. Let's begin the discussion. Alper, could you please take the floor? You're muted, I think.
I apologize. Classic mistake in these events. Greetings to all of you, also to my co-panelists. I'm very happy to be with them today. And Armenak, thank you for organizing this and for inviting us. Yes, it's the day after in Turkey, what has often been referred to almost in a cliche form in many outlets around the world and among many analysts as the most critical elections of 2023 has taken place. Part one came to a conclusion yesterday because Turkey had twin elections yesterday. The voters cast their vote for both the presidency and for parliament. According to the Turkish system, in the presidency, the winner is required to garner more than 50% of the popular vote. That did not take place, so now we will have a runoff in 2 weeks for the presidential election, but the composition of parliament is pretty much clear now. We are still expecting the official results, but just to set the stage, let me give you information. We had 4 presidential candidates up until about a week to 10 days ago. At that point, one of the candidates withdrew. So yesterday, Turks voted for 3 candidates. And Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the incumbent and leader of Turkey for the past 20 plus years, was able to garner 49+% of the votes, just shy of the 50% plus required. The leader of the center-left opposition party, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, came 5 percentage points behind him, around about 45%. And then what has turned into now a kingmaker, the third candidate, Sinan Ogan, who was previously a member of the far-right National Movement Party in Turkey, and ran under a different alliance of political parties, basically representing the far right again and the secular nationalist vote base, garnered more than 5% of the votes. So now we will have a runoff on the 28th between the incumbent President Erdogan and the left opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. This result, in my view, combined with the fact that the incumbent Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his alliance of various political parties that basically sit on the far right, are conservative in their out view, have been able to obtain a majority in parliament at a much higher degree than expected, represents, I think, a victory for the incumbent, for Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Up until a couple of days before the election, most of the analysts were arguing, myself included, that the opposition seemed to have momentum behind them. And that had made this election particularly interesting because Turkey has been under the rule of Recep Tayyip Erdogan for more than 20 years now under the AK Party. He has been particularly successful in his political survivability. And this election was particularly interesting because it really transpired into almost a vote on the social contract in Turkey, in the sense that the narratives that were put at play by the incumbent and his alliance of political parties, and by that of the opposition, were diametrically opposed to one another. President Erdogan reverted to an area where he is particularly talented in consolidating his base, by first criminalizing the opposition, by focusing on identity politics, by speaking about the fact that the opposition is working with third parties, with external forces, with individuals or parties or forces he refers to as those that have terrorist inclinations. And he really tried to appeal to the nationalist and conservative base in Turkey. And he recently expanded his alliance and also carried them into parliament with political parties that have quite conservative views, including in terms of women's rights. So that is where he tried to resonate with the Turkish public at large. And we have to remember, he was trying to do this against the backdrop of very unfavorable economic circumstances in Turkey, high inflation rates, a clear mismanagement of the economy, the after effects of a devastating earthquake experience that Turkey had, where it was quite visible that the governance capability under his help had not delivered because the government and the related agencies were very slow in reacting and providing the necessary support. And then we had, of course, scenes of many buildings collapsing, some understandably, given the nature of the magnitude of the earthquakes, but some also probably because of corruption and bad governance and the fact that the codes were not followed at the time. But he was able to flip that image and convince the populace at large that he and he alone would be able to pull Turkey out of this difficult circumstance, both in terms of the economy, which he actually created himself, or in terms of the effects of the earthquake, where again, it was under his watch that the government was not able to perform as it should have been. So it's an interesting aspect of this to analyze, because it seems what he pitched to the public at large, which is, yes, things may have gone wrong. Yes, the economy may be bad, and we may have made some mistakes here and there, which is a confession that he very rarely makes, but he made it on one or two occasions during the campaign. He was able to convince them that at this point in time, he is the man to take Turkey out of this challenging circumstance. And that seems to have worked with the populace at large. When I look at the results of the elections, as I mentioned them to be, with Erdogan and the AKP both leading in the presidential elections and obtaining a majority in parliament, in my view, the opposition has basically exceeded its own expectations. Because up until the elections, as I said, the expectation was that Kılıçdaroğlu might even win in the first round. And the opposite, and Erdogan's tactic here was to ensure that he could take the presidential elections to a runoff, because he was assuming that he would be able to win in the second term, especially if he was able to garner support for himself within parliament. And now the Turkish populace will have to decide on what to do with a situation in which Parliament is under the majority rule now of Erdogan and his alliance. So they will have to decide whether it will be better for Turkey to offset that reality by voting for Kılıçdaroğlu as the president to provide some sort of checks and balances, or whether they will vote for more coherent governance, which is what Erdogan will talk about, and vote for Erdogan in the presidential elections. And I think the opposition really is in a difficult situation here, because there is quite a severe, I believe, state of demoralization on the part of the opposition. They had higher expectations. They did not definitely expect Erdogan and his alliance to win the majority in parliament, though it was expected that they may have more votes. So we'll see where it goes. And obviously, this will have serious implications, not only on the domestic political scene in Turkey, but also in terms of the foreign policy choices that will be made by the Turkish government. But we will have to wait and see who wins the presidency, because in the executive presidential system that Turkey has, whereas parliament is still obviously an important element of power, it has really been diminished in terms of the role that it plays in daily politics. And if Kılıçdaroğlu were to win the presidency in the second round on the 28th, we would have a different scenario. But if Erdogan were to win, then with a majority in parliament and by having the executive power, that would be a totally different story. And we can talk about that in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Alper. Please, let's move on to Barçın. I think what Alper said pretty much set the scene, and now I think we would like, you know, some details and maybe expansion on some issues.
Thank you, Armenak, and thank you for this occasion, because that also gives me an opportunity for brainstorming, and I'm looking forward to hear from my colleagues, but also we can learn from the questions as well. On a small note, if my connection would be bad, I have another internet connection, so let me know, then I will switch to that one. I totally subscribe and agree to what Alper has just said. I'm trying to avoid repetitions. Maybe let me try to add some of my take and expand on where he has left. Now, if we look to the numbers, the AKP has lost in the parliament. Its vote from 2018, which was 42, dropped to 35, 7-point drop. Mr. Erdogan had gotten 53% in 2018. Now he's below 50%. Now, obviously, this shows a drop, but after 21 years in power, we would have expected the government fatigue to factor in more. We do not see that. As a surprise of the election was the fact that its smaller coalition partner, Nationalist Movement Party, has maintained 10%, and it was a right strategy on their part to go on their own ticket. Normally, expectations were that they would the rate would drop. Having said that, the opposition doesn't have much to celebrate. Why? Because the CHP, who had 22% of the votes in 2018, has now 25% in the parliament. And that is thanks to the fact that actually CHP has made a coalition with 3 or 4 smaller parties, and out of 3 are rather conservative, pious. So what we see, and this creates basically a disappointment among the supporters of the opposition, and especially of the CHP, is that CHP voters have carried with them more conservative votes to the parliament when they have voted for CHP. So now the 3 parties which were sort of breakaways from the AKP, they are presented in the parliament, whereas these parties have not worked in order to succeed for Kılıçdaroğlu to become president. They were nowhere to be seen on the field. They were not campaigning successfully for Kılıçdaroğlu. They were not on the ballot box. So while CHP has helped these 4 small parties, which are conservative, pious, enter the parliament, these parties have not helped Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu win the presidential elections, which gives us, which brings me to the fact that the election results shows that the CHP, which was 22, came to 27, 25, and usually there is this conviction in Turkey that this is maximum CHP can get, 25 to 27. But this shows us that it is stuck there, that whatever it does, it cannot increase its vote. And this is going to be an important question that the CHP, which represents under normal circumstances the secular and more democratic segment of the society, they will have to do a very serious soul searching on that. Can you please remind me, do I have 4 minutes? I forgot to check my time.
Please continue. You do have.
Okay, so there is a serious disappointment in terms of how CHP has performed, how its strategy to attract from AKP by making alliance with these other small parties have not worked. And Turkey has moved forward toward extreme right, toward more nationalist right. We have not seen this in the polls, basically. But my understanding, I have read some analysis from certain political scientists who've said the same sort of thing has happened in certain countries like Hungary, like Brazil, because the electorate who want to vote extreme right, they don't want to come and say it out loud. They're not so proud of saying it, but when they go to the ballot box as a protest vote, they are voting for extreme right. So when we look at the votes of Nationalist Movement Party, which is within the incumbent coalition, and the 10% of E Party, which is in the opposition alliance, and when we look to the other smaller parties, around 23% represents this nationalistic far right, which is one of the key takes of the elections, in my view. I would agree with Alper. I have waking up in the morning asking, where is the economic crisis? I don't see it in the election results, basically. Who is suffering from the economic crisis? Apart me, maybe, so the economic crisis does not seem to be a determinant factor, which tells us, as Alper has said, that President Erdogan has succeeded in his strategy of polarizing the nation, and one has to give him credit for creating a special bond with his voters. As Alper has said, at times he have confessed that things might not have worked well, but he's been asking for more support at least one more time. In this regard, I want to open a parenthesis. Ahead of the elections, we were always asked, who holds the key for change? Women, young voters, the first-time voters. In terms of the women, my anecdotal observance from the ballot boxes is that traditionally AKP has more women voters than male voters. I think Mr. Erdogan has succeeded again in forging a very emotional bond with especially conservative women. The level of participation of Turkish women to workforce is around 30%. The rest, 70, 60%, they're housewives. Most of them are conservatives, and maybe even their husbands, their family, their friends do not respect. Whereas Mr. Erdogan made them feel valuable by making the family, presenting family as something very sacred. Being a mother he has glorified being a mother. He has glorified being a wife. He has glorified women as the essential tenet of the family, and that gives a lot of recognition to women in Turkey, especially conservative, pious women. And let's not forget that also, according to some estimate, 30 million people in Turkey receive some state help. So if a woman does not work but is taking care of an elderly or taking care of a handicap, they get cash, whereas these resources under normal circumstances, they should be spent for daycare centers so that women can go out and be more empowered. As Alper said, earthquake has not had a big impact on the decision, on the final outcome of the election. So we were talking about this deep wave. This deep wave did not work in terms of bringing Turkey back to more democracy, but apparently there was a deep wave for ultra-nationalism. I think the road ahead is going to be quite bumpy in terms of the opposition. What we have seen is that in the current circumstances, forging alliances has served the small parties, has eroded the votes of the big parties, which have made them more prisoner of the small parties. And looking ahead, we will see the third candidate trying to negotiate with the two sides, but I would rather imagine that he would stand nearer to the incumbent president. Having said that, I don't think his followers are devoted to him. I'm not so sure if he fingers one side or the other side, this will be translated automatically. All his voters will not go to the place, because I don't think he has a very loyal voter constituency. It was rather protest votes. Let me just stop here and pass it over to Celine, maybe.
Thank you. Please, to Celine.
Myself. Do you hear me now?
Yeah. So I want to apologize that I forgot to mention that Celine is the London representative of Ankara Policy Center. I would add that to the bio. So over to you, please.
So speaking last in these panels is the toughest thing to do, but I will also try to avoid repetitions as best as I can. Well, the election outcome was disappointing for opposition voters. It was disappointing for women because the Free Coast Party, which has a criminal past and also has a very pejorative looking down on women's rights, who is very critical of the women's place in Turkish society, managed to get 2 MPs in the parliament. And also for anyone, for the young people, the outcome should be very disappointing, because we have a serious brain drain going on. Young people suffer from high unemployment. They want better education standards. They want the job they want meritocracy in determining the outcome of their job applications, not their party loyalties. So we need to explain the election outcome, of course, even if it defies conventional wisdom. Why I say that? Because this was the first time in decades that the ruling party entered the elections without running in the lead, and there was a potential for change, but that didn't happen. Of course, the race is not over. Now we are going to have another runoff for the presidential elections, but still, I've been working on election scenarios in the last 6 months, and this scenario is one of the most how can I say, lesser evil perhaps, but not very best, I should say, because the prospects of a split government may push the voters to align with Erdogan in the presidential elections. Also, now we have the other lead, Sinan Ogan. When the other parties try to negotiate with Sinan Ogan, any concessions, especially on behalf of CHP, may alienate Kurdish votes. And maybe I should also touch upon what went wrong in the election campaign of the opposition, because it is not only identity politics at stake, but it is also the economic policies, as Barcin mentioned, touched upon very correctly. Well, I see two major groups. First of all, we know that the stakes were too high for both sides to lose in the elections, especially for the supporters of the ruling coalition, because in the case of a government change, they would lose their cultural, economic, and political gains they have accumulated in the last 2 decades. And I see, as I said, two major groups. One of them, I should say, the well-off segments which profit from business contacts and networks with the political and economic elites, and they prospered immensely over the decades. And they want this. They want the status quo to continue. The other group, even though they are the victims of the economic disparity, they are the victims, they are most hurt from the economic downturn. They live on state aid, and they want this to go on. And so, and also maybe a third dimension is that we have in our Turkish political culture a prevailing conventional belief, I should say, perhaps, to put it more correctly, that politics is corrupt, politics is dirty. Anyone who governs is going to be engaged in dirty business. So if someone is going to be governing us, then why not someone who is one of us? Approach, I think, was played a role in the election outcome. And also, just very quickly about flaws in the or maybe mistakes of the opposition's election campaign. Well, looking at the election outcome, I see that the Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy was not perhaps a good idea all along, that his Alevi identity after the earthquake with his famous video excited everyone, but on the other hand, probably it caused Sunni Muslims to rally around Erdogan. Another thing is HDP's, People's Democratic Party's, not fielding a candidate. It also, of course, made a change in the votes of CHP, but on the other hand, played into hands of Erdogan as he framed the opposition as the collaborators of terrorism, this and that, labeled them as terrorists. So another thing should be, again, the coalition, in the wake of the Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy's announcement, EU Party's leader Meral Akşener almost walked out from the coalition table, and that also, I think, triggered the traumatic experiences of coalition governments that caused instability in Turkish politics throughout the 1990s, and that, I think, had a negative impact on the voters' behavior. And one last thing, the voters, or 50% of the population, voted for the status quo, and from now on, what is going to happen? Polarization will continue probably, and we cannot say Turkey will continue business as usual, but nationalism will be rising, and this is not a good news for anyone who wants to see a democratic Turkey in the neighborhood. Maybe I should also stop to breathe.
You still have 1 minute, so let me ask you, any positives? Any positives? I think any positives from the one positive I see here, the bright side, is that we didn't have any violent incidents breaking out in the election on the election night, because we were concerned about some violent attacks. We had a very exhausting and stressful campaign period. We saw opposition, not only opposition, but opposition parties of each other, opposition
supporters of different parties attacking each other's party headquarters, or we saw Ekrem İmamoğlu, Istanbul mayor, who is also one of the potential VP candidates. His rally bus was pelted with stones, and so we were concerned that in the case of a close election result, that the ruling party may object to the results, and still there is still going a controversy around the vote counting. Last night we weren't sure from which agency we should follow the election results. I had a hard time trying to find the correct ones. The opposition complained about the Anadolu Agency, state-run Anadolu Agency, manipulating the results, not releasing the data that they submitted, having the wet signatures, number of the wet signature results. And so trying to show Erdogan in the lead over Kılıçdaroğlu. So we had some problems, but as more data will be released, we will be able to reflect in a healthy manner and reflect on the election outcome in a more accurate way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your interventions. We have several questions. One of them I also had in mind, I think is the toughest. So I want to pose that question and give you 1 or 2 minutes each to make an intervention, and any other point that you wanted to make, you can add to that. The question essentially is whether Kılıçdaroğlu can turn it around. Is there a possibility? Is there a scenario where he and his coalition could actually, come back in the second round? 1 or 2 minutes each. Let's start with Barçın. And if I think you had a point to add, Barçın,
okay.
please.
I think this is going to be very, very difficult. Maybe something I have forgotten to say is that there was no level playing field. I mean, this was one of the most unfair election campaigns that I have seen in my adult time. The whole President Erdogan has used all the means of the state. His partisans were very organized. So maybe some people can ask about votes, stealing of the votes, etc. I have been talking about some of the observers in the ballot boxes. They said they had very, very difficult time at the ballot box. Those who were observing the elections on the side of the opposition, because most of the time the officials in the ballot boxes, they were rather AKP, pro-AKP people. So we have seen, just as Selin has said, how the state news agency is dominated by AKP. So are the officials in the ballot boxes. And looking to the future, one of the most important difficulty is the feeling of disappointment among the supporters of the opposition. Positive thing, I think there has been thousands of volunteers who did not sort of trust the opposition, and they have taken to the ballot boxes. They've started working at 5 o'clock in the morning. They have worked until the next day. And I think this is rather positive to see Turkish civil society, active. Having said that, they feel again let down by the opposition, and they see it as a battle against uphill. And there's a possibility that some among the opposition supporters might not even go to the ballot box, perhaps in the second round. But this is maybe the first day's emotions that may be changed in the coming 2 weeks, perhaps.
You think so, Alper? Would that change, or is there a chance for Kılıçdaroğlu?
Frankly speaking, it's very difficult. It's a serious uphill struggle. I'm glad Barçın mentioned the fact that this was really one of the most unfair playing fields going into any election in Turkish history. The again, as Barçın underlined, the full force of the state was behind the AKP campaign. You had ministers campaigning on the part of the AKP using all the leverage that they had as bureaucrats, as political leaders. So that was a very unfair playing field. And in that respect, actually, one can argue that the opposition was successful in sort of dealing with this challenge. There's one aspect of this that is important. Going into the elections, a lot of analysts were wondering whether there would be ballot stuffing into the boxes and a lot of irregularities in the process. Despite a lot of the challenges that Turkey has in terms of its democratic credentials, the actual voting practice is quite transparent. It's a cumbersome process, and there are the challenges that Barçın alluded to. But at the end of the day, there's an element of transparency if the ballot boxes are manned by the opposition and by civil society and whoever wants to, that it makes it transparent. So there's a safety clause that Turkey still has there. But the challenge in Turkey under this executive presidential system and in the mentality in which Erdogan and the AKP have been governing Turkey is that now you have an almost full congruence of the state and the government, which is why you see bureaucrats in important positions leaning towards the AKP, and that has an impact on the way things function in the country. Now, if this trend continues in Turkey, that would be a big challenge, obviously, in terms of ensuring checks and balances. Turkey already has significant difficulties in that regard. Now, that background, to come back to your question, makes it increasingly difficult for a demoralized opposition to step out of that challenge and to win this. And frankly, again, Kılıçdaroğlu has never come across as the man who has the spark to generate that sort of momentum. He seemed to be successful in keeping together a juxtaposition of very odd members of an alliance going into these elections. And he was giving certain messages in terms of uniting society, challenging Erdogan's polarizing rhetoric in a very refreshing manner that I believe appealed to a certain segment of society. But the realities on the ground made Erdogan's rhetoric more appealing, which is, more nationalistic, more conservative, and the fact that he is the man that can deliver. The humility, the refreshing humility that Kılıçdaroğlu represents was not enough to excite the population at large, and we see the result now. So that creates a situation in which I think it will be extremely difficult to imagine that the opposition can pull its act together. They performed very poorly last night. I don't think the opposition was out there. The Istanbul and Ankara mayors were making statements now and then, and I think they made some blunders themselves, because at one point the Ankara mayor said that it's going to go to a runoff, whereas it was too early in the stage of the elections to say that. And then the alliance representatives of Kılıçdaroğlu were not there in full force. They were really missing in action, in my view, in many regards. So how they can sort of come out of this picture and inspire the population at large is a big question in my mind.
Indeed. Celine, please, your opinion on the matter.
Well, I'm not optimistic either. Sorry, just a second.
Let me just say that while Selin is coming, Erdogan is going to say we have the majority in the parliament, and he's going to say, when we have the majority in parliament, vote for me, so that we don't have something in the parliament and something else in the president. Exactly. Sorry, Selin, I was just trying to...
No, sorry, thank you. You were a lifesaver. I'm in the public library room of a hotel, so that's why things may happen. Sorry about the noise. Well, in 2 weeks' time, I see it very difficult for the opposition to shore up its voter base and win the presidential elections, even though I wish them to, is a desired outcome, but still it is very difficult. They have been too slow to provide an outline, provide a detailed program to convince the voters, the constituency, that they are competent enough, that they can govern together. Even if this is a 6+ party coalition, that they would be competent enough to govern. So on the other side, we have Erdogan using all the state resources, as both Alper and Barçın emphasized. He's a very experienced politician, famous for his oratory skills, and ran a very divisive campaign. And so it is very difficult for the opposition to compensate for what they should have done in the previous months to cover everything and convince the voters that they are fit for the job, and that I'm referring to Kılıçdaroğlu, that he's fit for the job in 2 weeks. But still, to see the bright side again, to see the glass half full, Turkish people, Turkish electorate is doing using the only democratic instrument they can for a government change, for a democratic reset in the country. So they are going to the ballot boxes and voting. So that explains the high turnout in the elections last night. And I hope that people don't give up their hopes and still go and vote for the parties that they think they should win. I mean, for the candidate, they should vote for the candidate who think they should win.
Yeah. Thank you. We have actually a question directed to you, Celine, from the viewers. Alexander is asking, what are the main selection voting criteria for Erdogan's victory? Is it merely identity politics and the conservative Islamic TR, or it's which surpassed I think we touched on this, that the economic crisis.
Yes, but maybe very briefly, I should also add one thing. Well, Erdogan succeeded in denying responsibility for every negative development that took place under his rule. Like when the earthquake hit 11 provinces, it was the act of God. When economic crisis happened, it's the foreign plots, this and that. So he is very good at changing the narrative, controlling the discourse, controlling the narrative in Turkish society. So that is also an important fact that we should bear in mind. Especially in the second presidential runoff as well.
Yeah, so we have two other questions from Ahmed Naji. With the EE party joining the Kılıçdaroğlu coalition, aiming to change the political system from presidential to parliamentary, what will be the motives of EE voters to re-elect Kılıçdaroğlu in the runoff? Or maybe actually we can continue to his second question, which essentially is, the coalition. I think the bigger question is whether coalition is capable of maintaining the unity of in the runoff and essentially challenge Erdogan in the second round, or we might see the coalition crumbling or having bigger internal issues.
I'm happy to step in if you'd like. Just very briefly. Yeah. That's one of the biggest challenges for the opposition, obviously, because they were riding on a ticket where their biggest promise to the electorate was that they hope to gain enough power, both within parliament and by winning the presidency, to initiate a transition in Turkey back to a parliamentary system of governance. And they were arguing that the executive presidential system has not served Turkey well. They are not in a position to suggest that they would be able to do that now. So within these 2 weeks going into the runoff, they will have to find a different narrative, and they will have to agree on a different narrative. And I think the strongest element that they can come forward with is the need to ensure a certain form of checks and balances in Turkey, given the way in which Erdogan is inclined, as he has proven, to centralize power, to disregard checks and balances, and to politicize and gut out all of the state institutions. Now, this is a rational, not to compliment myself, but this would be a rational expectation. But the reality on the ground is Erdogan flips that debate and says, if we were to do that, then we will end up with incoherent government. We've had systems of governance in Turkey where we've had multiple coalitions. These are the Turkey of the old days. We now are a country that has a very firm governance. I am the leader of that movement, and with your support I will take Turkey to the sky. And that narrative appeals to the people, and they totally, it glosses over all of the other challenges that both Selin and Barçın have been referring to. And I'm afraid that is a more appealing narrative, coupled with the fact that Erdogan is a much stronger orator. So unless the opposition can really come together with a strong message, display unity, and convince the electorate that they believe in themselves as well, I think they really have a significant uphill struggle.
Yeah, perhaps voter fatigue as well, right? We saw that this was one of the, or I think the election which showed the most turnout in Turkey's history, or one of the most, if I'm not mistaken. But in the second phase, we might see voter fatigue, maybe giving up on the race even before 28th of May. Coming back to one question I had from earlier, polls were suggesting something different. I think one of the reasons why a lot of observers were a bit surprised is because we regularly get relatively reliable polls from Turkey on various matters. Why do you think that? What changed over the course? And I've read some analysis that maybe some voters, for the polls, they would say something, but in reality, when they go to ballots, would vote for someone else. And in this debate, the Alevi identity of Kılıçdaroğlu was brought, that someone for a poll wouldn't necessarily say that he's not going for a candidate, but in reality would. What is your opinion on this? Yeah.
Okay. May I step in?
Yes,
okay.
Barçın, please.
I tried to allude to that in my previous answers, and this is a general observation of certain political scientists saying that in general, in the world as well, sometimes those who want to vote for extreme right, they usually hide. They're not so proud of saying they would vote extreme right, but their will reflects itself when they go to the ballot box. So that's why we are talking about this deep wave. We've been talking about this deep wave, which we thought there would be an urge for more democracy for the opposition, but this deep wave apparently happens to be a more nationalistic, far right the deep wave. But another reason why we have such election results is also, I think we have seen post-truth world in action in Turkey. The president saw no problem of demonizing the CIHP by making them equal to the PKK. I mean, during his campaign rallies, he really ran certain videos showing as if the leader of the PKK, which is considered as a terrorist organization in Turkey and in Europe and United States as well, he ran videos showing that PKK leader allegedly is supporting Kılıçdaroğlu, which was not true. And I know from anecdotal evidence that some of the AKP voters who were aware that AKP was not well governing the country, who were aware of the economic difficulties, they kept saying, well, if we vote for CHP, it amounts to vote for the PKK. So this post-truth phenomenon has been used by Erdogan and seems to be successful. And from there, I want to come to the Kurdish votes in Turkey. Normally, the pro-Kurdish political party has also lost votes. Previous elections, they had 12%, something like that. Now they had 8%. And we also have to make some analysis about where the pro-Kurdish party is heading, because this shows that some of the Turks who are not necessarily have this ethnic bondage to pro-Kurdish party, they had used their strategic voting on their behalf. It appears that they have withdrawn that vote, and that I am a little bit afraid that the pro-Kurdish party could turn out to be purely ethnic party, and that they are no longer the kingmakers. The kingmakers probably have become the extreme right, whereas their powerful position of influencing politics in Turkey, in my view, has decreased, and we will see the repercussions on that during Mr. Oğan's negotiations, which will also partly have something to do with Syria, by the way, but we might come there in a few minutes.
Yeah. I'm tempted to be devil's advocate here a bit. Erdogan saying that a bigger majority in the parliament and he coming back to he winning the election would mean stability for Turkey. Isn't he right? I mean, a coalition of 6 parties in the parliament. Kılıçdaroğlu, head of president of Turkey after 20 years, trying to build relations with the West, with maintaining relations with Russia, with the neighbors, etc. He was definitely going to be, or he could be on a big challenge. Isn't Erdogan, isn't Erdogan a better, more stable choice? Just for the record, I'm being devil's advocate.
May I jump in, if I may?
Please,
I missed
the
last round, but if the opposition succeeded in getting a parliamentary majority, their main goal was to change the political system and reverse the parliamentary political system. And their other goal was to rebuild state institutions. We were expecting to see a long period of restoration. Why do we need this reforming and restoration of state institutions? Because we have been ruled by one man, and especially since Turkey switched to this executive presidential system, President Erdogan is deciding for everything. He is ruling the economy, he's ruling politics, all the state institutions are turning to Erdogan to get his approval to move on or move on with the decisions that are being made. And especially in the foreign policy and also in the earthquake, we also saw that how when the state institutions do not function properly, the extent of incompetence were revealed with the government's mishandling of the relief and rescue efforts. But anyway, going back to the executive presidential system, this complicates, because one man cannot decide for everything, and we need robust institutions for a government, for a country to make accurate decisions, and especially foreign policy. For example, Bartun has written extensively on the issue how diplomats were appointed, especially the political appointments and its implications, because the criteria for appointments were only the loyalty to the party, loyalty to Erdogan, not their experience or their education, so on and so forth. And of course, this is in the case of a restoration of institutions, Turkey would become a more predictable country, and also in foreign policy decisions, this would it would also enable Turkey to engage in cooperations that would be more transparent for the public to see. And of course, this would bring stability for the country as well, because when the state institutions are eroding, this also paves the way for the instrumentalization of various policies for the sake of domestic political gains. And this happened in the Turkish political context, and we have been suffering from its implications.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and related to that note, we have another question from Alexander. What about the future of Turkey's relation with the West? Do you think that this landslide victory will renew Erdogan's political capital, permitting him the required U-turn? Well, I mean, let's say that things are not over yet. Still, we have to wait until 28th of May. But I think what he means is that if there was a landslide victory for Erdogan, would that give the political capital to make a U-turn. Alper, do you want to intervene on that?
Yes, of course. If Erdogan were to win the presidency as well, I think his foreign policy trajectory is obvious to many. So he's the better known interlocutor in that regard, and that's something that you also alluded to. But his preferences and his choices have not necessarily corresponded to a like-minded posture on the part of Turkey as far as its Western allies and partners are concerned. I think what we will see is, the economic realities in Turkey, first of all, will weigh on Erdogan and his choices, meaning that he will have to opt for more stable relations with particularly the West as well, where he will be looking to inevitably for foreign financial flows, as difficult as it has become, both because of the global context and also because of the image coming out of Turkey. Second, Turkey under Erdogan has been recalibrating its foreign policy for almost 2+ years now. I think that trajectory will continue. The challenge, of course, now is that the political mix in the alliance that Erdogan will be leading in parliament already, and if he wins the presidency, is one that has a stronger element of conservative right elements in it. So the degree to which that will pressure him to reflect that in foreign policy decisions may be a challenge. But let's not forget Erdogan, and that's where maybe what you alluded to, there's some reality to that fact. Erdogan is a leader that is able to chart a course for Turkey and convince his supporters that that is the right one. If, for example, he chooses for some reason or another to have better relations with the West because of the economic realities, he's probably the best positioned political leader in Turkey, despite his rhetoric going into the elections, to explain to the public at large that that is what needs to be done. Look at what he's done with Egypt. He's shaken hands with Sisi. He's ready to shake hands with Assad, the guy that Turkey was ready to overthrow. So under Erdogan, we can expect all sorts of surprises. I believe that he will be obliged, even though viscerally he may desire otherwise, to follow a more stable and predictable relationship with the West, but it will be transactional. As far as Sweden is concerned, if they take a couple of steps, I think he will be ready going into the NATO summit to greenlight their membership in NATO as well. On the S-400, he will not walk away from that decision, but I don't expect much deepened cooperation in defense industry with Russia, particularly after the poor performance in Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, to conclude, I have one question to all of you, given that our panel is also on the future implications. Let's say if Erdogan won the second round, what would Erdogan's or AKP ruled Turkey mean for the future of democracy? Given that we started with Alper and ended with Celine. Celine, please go ahead first, and Barcan, your position in the middle will remain the same. Please, Celine.
What will be may I have the question? Would you please repeat again the question?
So, another round, another 5 years of Erdogan ruled Turkey. What does that mean for Turkey's democracy?
Well, I think we have been discussing this since the beginning, but it is not good news for a democratic reset in the country. We will see polarization deepening in the society. Perhaps I'm expecting to see a political apathy on behalf of the opposition voters. More repression may come because people in the wake of the elections show their true colors. Government knows who is pro, who is against, who is happy or not. And so we can expect to see more crackdowns, democratic crackdowns. We have political prisoners. They will not be released. With the West and the EU, the United States, they will no longer be critical about Turkey because transactional relations is making things easier for them. They don't have to deal with changing Turkey, bringing Turkey to the democratic fold. Especially for the EU, that is the case. They don't have to put up with I'm so sorry for the noise. I'm so sorry.
No
They don't
worries.
have
It's
to
okay.
deal with the criticisms of the member states. The case point here is Greece and Cyprus, of course. So things will continue a bit like the things as they were before the elections. I don't expect any changes on that front, but for the democracy, I think we would have passed the point of return, because and expect the nature to run its course in this context, I think.
Thank you, Celine. Fortune?
I'm going to try to pick up on where maybe Alper has left. You know, the realities in the ground under normal circumstances would dictate a more, the rationality and the realities on the ground would dictate a toning down of rhetoric against the West, right? But whenever I thought about the rational road Erdogan should take, he has done usually exactly the opposite. Thus, when Alper said, he's open for surprises, indeed. So I am hearing many analysts saying that after the elections, he would just take it as the approval of his economic policies and his foreign policy. And that, so it's going to be 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. I am not expecting, as Celine has said, an improvement in democracy, even though under normal circumstances, he should do so in order to warm up the relations with the West, in order to get some financial assistance, because we are going to face a tremendous economic situation. And there is, however, there is now also another factor which could sort of overshadow Turkey's relations with the West, and that would be the Russia and the Putin factor. This has been a first, I think, in Turkish electoral history, when we have seen a country openly supporting and stepping in favor of another country. Why would Putin postpone twice the payment for natural gas? So at the end of this electoral period, I think Putin is going to come with a bill, and I don't know what type of a bill he would come, and and that would obviously affect Turkey's relation with the West as well. Therefore, I think things will get worse before they get better. But indeed, that's why some analysts are saying that Erdogan will continue with his unorthodox economic policies, his foreign policy, but this is going to be extremely unsustainable, and therefore, even if he wins the second round, his rule won't last for a long time, because it's not going to be tenable.
Thank you. Alper?
Just one thing, maybe also to end on a positive note. One of the realities of Turkey is that it's a young population, and a related reality, it seems, if the polls are correct, at least in this regard, is that the younger generations are a segment of Turkish society where Erdogan and the AKP has had the lowest level of support. And I think that may have already been reflected in the choice of many supporters that do not want to vote for Erdogan, but do not believe that Kılıçdaroğlu is the man to solve Turkey's problems, and have therefore migrated, in this case, to Sinan Ogan, the third presidential candidate. And it seems, again, according to certain analyses, that this is a relatively young, secular, nationalist segment of society that is really looking for its orientation. When I think of that, if Erdogan were to win the presidential elections, the real question in my mind is, post-Erdogan, where is Turkey going politically, and how he will design the future of the country after that. And we will have to look at his vice presidential appointments. Will he be looking to a heir that he will bring maybe from near in the family environment? And there are already some names that are being floated around. So looking at that trajectory, I think, will be important. But coming back to your main question, I don't think that we can expect much positive to outcome in terms of Turkey's democratic standards. Also, particularly given the composition of the alliance with which Erdogan has achieved the results that he has.
May I step in one more time, just to Just one question. Just sorry. Just one. No questions. Just one point. A quick one. On foreign policy front, since we will no longer have checks and balances, the remaining institutions will probably dismantle in an additional 5 years of Erdogan rule. In that case, the only thing that can stabilize Turkey's political trajectory can be the economic constraints, unfortunately. In order to get the economic investment from the West, Turkey will embrace a moderate tone, that it has already done so before in the wake of the earthquakes. And one more thing, will Turkey, a more nationalist Turkey, be a better Turkey for forging cooperation in the foreign policy front? That would be a question for the West, I think.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Carnegie, thank you for the panelists. Thanks for your opinion, and thanks for your time. Okay, I think we are off. Okay.